And actually, okay, I have a follow-up, or maybe partially follow-up to that, which also connects to something you said before while you were talking with Denise. So you said that you believe that the technology is there. We basically don't need anything else, right? Or something along those lines. And it's quite interesting. You're right. I'll give it back to you, and then you can clarify that. But this is interesting because it reminds me of a talk that Chris Monroe has given last year in Singapore. So I go to the talk, and at the end of the talk, he says, like, look, we at IonQ believe, and I'm paraphrasing again, right? But basically the bottom line was we believe that the technology is there. Is not a physics problem anymore. It's becoming an engineer, or maybe he said it's already become an engineering problem. Okay, I thought it was quite an interesting statement, right? So I don't use Twitter, but I write on LinkedIn something along those lines, and some people got really mad. They're like, no, this is
bullshit detector too.
It wasn't the bullshit detector. No, and I think they have they make a fair point, right? They say this is not true. We still have a lot of problems to understand in physics, algorithms, etc., etc. So maybe then the simple question for you would be: do you think there's something that is still missing in quantum computing to really make it useful, scalable, accessible? You can choose what angle to look at, or do you think we are there? Is really only a matter of scaling things up?
See, only and just are the words that I would avoid. I think that the basic science of if you had a qubit and could you do computationally useful things, that I think nobody would argue with, right? Or nobody would actually get into at the numbers that they do into quantum information science, and particularly into quantum algorithms, even as a theory. Theoretic.
Some people still think that we will not be able to reach the full tolerant threshold. So
it is engineering, but I think where it gets wrong, and where I will completely agree with the naysayers, is that it's not just engineering, right? Just means that that's simple. This is very hard engineering. This is very difficult stuff, and I think that the popular press and sometimes some people in the startup community, or even in the corporate community, downplay that part of it. The kind of engineering that we're doing is very hard. Nobody's done it before, right? By definition, this is not just engineering. This is really incredibly hard engineering that we're doing. But I will agree with Chris, who I respect greatly, in the premise that this is not. There's not real basic science risk here, in the sense that if you can create the system with low enough error and with these caveats, that it'll work. We know theoretically that it'll work. We know theoretically if we had a fault-tolerant computer, you would get speed up. We've known that for a couple of decades now. The question is, can we get there? I think all of the points along the dots along the line right here, if you connect the dots and you look at a trajectory, it kind of points to, and the acceleration of the amount of dots we're getting on that line tells us that, yes, we're going to get there. Are there going to be challenges? Are there going to be needed step functions and capabilities that will get us to the promised land of that fault-tolerant computer someday? Yes, but I don't tend to think in these hardcore binary dichotomies in science, right? I think in technology, most of these things are more of like a gradient, right? And so I don't think, okay, we're going to wake up one day and fault tolerance happens, error correction is perfect, and we have endless gate depth, and home run, we're done. That's not how it's going to work. It's going to be more like a NISQ error that gets better and better and better and better and better and acceleratingly better, and our error correction gets better and better and better, and our actual commercial usage of these things becomes more and more and more practical, and that expands, and then more and more investment gets in, and you have an acceleration curve towards that eventual fault-tolerant promised land that we may or may not reach. To be honest, but I think along the way to getting there, many technologies will come out of this that are maybe not as we envision it, but that will give us some computational capabilities that are better than what we do now classically. So my bar for have we gotten there, have we crossed the chasm, is I think much lower than it would be for someone who comes from a hardcore computer science complexity theory background. They cannot even write a paper unless they show an exponential speed up, some asymptotic difference between what you can do in polynomial time on a classical computer and a fault-tolerant quantum computer or some kind of quantum computer or quantum device. And in the NISC, that's kind of hard to do because you're talking about heuristics anyway, and it's kind of hard to do formal proofs on those anyway. So really, we're stuck in this regime where we have to prove it empirically, just like we do with neural nets in the classical world. And so I think it's really hard to prove to those people that we're going to get there. But my bar is, okay, can we prove to a business person that we have, for example, a constant factor speedup? Oh, I said that horrible word, constant factor, because what people would say, there's only a constant factor speedup if you're, someone coming from a theoretical background. Oh, that's horrible. That's the worst result you could possibly get. It's 2 times faster. Now, I think Denise might agree with me. If you go to a CIO or someone at IBM and you say, I'm going to make your system twice as fast at doing what you already do, and therefore half the cost of what you're spending on your HPC budget, that's significant. So, and that's a business, and that's sustainable. So I think we suffer, I think, a little bit from the kind of people who are participating here, who we need, who are theorists coming into this world, and the way they've been trained academically to think in terms of complexity theory, because that's what gets you a paper. And the people who are coming from a different perspective, from a business perspective, that's also legitimate, saying, no, I only need to be a little bit better or faster or more energy efficient, okay? Is that going to win us a business? Is that going to get you to supremacy? Maybe not, but depending on your definition, maybe yes. So I think that, we don't live in this world of binary decisions here. I think the real world works in terms of what engineering will it take to get us to the CIO and the CFO making that decision. And I think that that's the relevant question. And it's hard for theoretical people and physicists and people who've never lived in that world to really think in those terms. And so it's natural that people who've never been in that world or been in a startup world or seen technology work that way, been through a purchasing cycle with a big company before, that they will think in terms of these academic constructs. And maybe that's also not correct, would be, I mean, when we came up with this very simplistic natural language technique that used this distributed parser that we came up with, all the natural language theory people at the time said, oh, that's too simple, that's simplistic, that's just word spotting by this distributed system. Yeah, but it's an adaptive system and it works. And yeah, but it's not elegant. It's not 20 years of my theory papers don't support this. How could it? Yeah, but it works. And so we got Siri, and then we got Alexa. And now nobody argues about the theory of that or whether neural networks are appropriate for that or any of that. It's irrelevant, actually, as a business. That doesn't mean that the work that's done ahead of time in the academic work, that you don't draw upon that, and that's also not vital to a new technology in a new field. It's a vital part of training people. It's a vital part of the discipline that we have scientifically in approaching this, and even from an engineering perspective, but it's not the only perspective, I would say. And I think that that's sometimes what we have here in this quantum field is people using different languages to try to communicate completely different concepts and thinking sometimes, oh, the words overlap, so we're saying the same thing. No, we're not. And I think that we have to maybe, as we progress, develop a better vocabulary to talk about what we really mean by advantage and what we really mean by commercially viable and these kind of things.
I think also on the last point that you made, and I agree with it, it might naturally simply disappear. It won't be a discussion anymore. Like as it happens with all other technologies, at some point nobody's gonna say anything about quantum advantage because who cares? It's not who cares, but as long as the technology can generate value for someone, that's all you need, really.
Yep, and the theory will continue to exist. Classical computer science departments still issue PhDs. Last time I checked, even though we've solved a lot of the fundamental problems in computer science. So, but have algorithms even in the classical world pushed forward? Yes, that's not going to go away. So, and it forms a very important part of how we train our rigor in the field, even in classical computer science. So I don't think that you're giving something up when you acknowledge that, okay, that a business could exist here and do something that's inferior to your, idealized notion, utopian notion of what needs to happen.
I agree with that. Yes. Thank you. Thanks.